No niin, terve vaan täältä Taimaan lämmöstä. On pikkuhiljaa tänne asettunut aloilleen ja ajattelin nyt tehdä tämmöisen videon tässä teille. No niin, vihdoin ja viimein on kissa nostettu pöydälle Yhdysvaltain presidentti Trumpin ja terveysministeri Kennedyn toimesta. Nyt me voidaan vihdoinkin alkaa käsittelemään tätä massiivista elefanttia täällä huoneessa. Yle on tietysti pyrkinyt kaikin mahdollisin keinoin mustamaalaamaan Trumpia ja Kennedyä näistä asioista. No mutta hei, katsotaanpa miten Ylen Aamussa käytiin keskustelua Trumpin ja Kennedyn väitteistä koskien rokotteita.
Muun muassa siitä, minkälaisia maailmanlaajuisia vaikutuksia Yhdysvaltain johdon rokotekriittisyydellä on myös meillä Suomessa. Tervetuloa Terveyden ja hyvinvoinnin laitoksen väestöosaston johtaja Otto Helve.
Huomenta. Sekä
Tampereen yliopiston akatemiatutkija Pia Vuolatto. Terveysministeri Robert Kennedy Jr. on siis muun muassa antanut potkuja keskeisille terveysvirkamiehille ja nimittänyt rokotteita suosittelevaan komitean ihmisiä, jotka ovat vastustaneet rokotuksia. Miltä sitä Amerikan meininki kuulostaa?
Joo, kiitos kysymyksestä. Kyllähän tässä aika paljon tapahtui. Ehkä ihan alkuun on tärkeää sanoa, että tämä niin kuin Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'in nimittäminen on yksi osa tätä kokonaisuutta, mitä on tapahtunut. Hyvä pitää mielessä se, että Yhdysvallat on myös vetäytynyt WHOsta. USAIDin rahoitus on käytännössä, USAIDin toiminta käytännössä loppunut. Ja näillä on myös huomattava vaikutus siihen, että miten kansainvälisesti rokotuksia voidaan toteuttaa. Että kyse ei ole vain siitä, että mitä Yhdysvalloissa on tehty, mutta kyllähän tämä on aika paljon aika huolestuttavia asioita tapahtunut hyvin lyhyessä ajassa.
Miten sinä näet Pia tilanteen?
Kyllä, minua huolestuttaa tämä tilanne, että tässähän murennetaan sellaista vuosia ja vuosikymmeniä kehitettyä järjestelmää, joka perustuu niin kuin asiantuntemukseen, asiantuntijatietoon, tieteelliseen tutkimukseen ja näin edelleen. Että
Our first witness is Mr. Aaron Siri. Mr. Siri is a managing partner of Siri and Glimstad with over 85 professionals. He's handled numerous high-profile cases involving challenges to medical mandates, restoring exemptions, agency transparency, including forcing FDA to release the COVID-19 vaccine licensure documents and deposing immunologists, infectious disease doctors, and vaccinologists. Mr. Siri.
Thank you, Senator. Leading up to 2013, the Institute of Medicine was commissioned by the United States Department of Health and Human Services to review the entire body of existing scientific literature to assess the safety of the CDC's childhood schedule as a whole. HHS paid the IOM to do that. After the IOM engaged in that task with a panel of multidisciplinary scientists, it concluded, quote, "The studies designed to examine the long-term effects of the cumulative number of vaccines or other aspects of the immunization schedule have not been conducted, end quote. That's the Institute of Medicine's finding after reviewing the entire body of scientific literature. Meaning the IOM could not find studies comparing, as you would do to study the safety of a product, an exposed group, meaning kids that got vaccines, the childhood schedule, with unvaccinated children, kids who got no vaccines, which is what you would need to assess the safety of the schedule. Lacking evidence to support safety, the best the IOM can conclude was, quote, "There is no evidence that the schedule is not safe," end quote. This, of course, also means the IOM cannot find evidence to conclude that the schedule is safe.
But Mr. Siri, I'd like you to go to your section and talk about the 661 studies that Dr. Scott is talking about in terms of these inert placebo controls. And just describe that in detail. I think it's interesting.
Sure. Actually, I think Dr. Scott has done a great service in terms of pointing out the lack of clinical trials supporting the safety of the routine injected childhood vaccines. you see, he's saying there are 661 inert controlled trials to support the safety of the routine injected childhood vaccines. But when you actually drill down into those 661 trials, let me give you the breakdown of them, okay? 567 of these trials were not a routine injected vaccine for a disease on the CDC's childhood schedule. They were for HIV vaccines or other vaccines. So totally irrelevant to the safety of routine injected childhood vaccines. The remaining 94 studies, 70 of them did not involve healthy children. For example, trials of HIV positive adults. Again, completely irrelevant to the safety of childhood vaccines. Of the remaining 24, 21 did not involve a U.S. licensed vaccine it was not a vaccine used as a control to license a currently used U.S. licensed vaccine. For example, a Chinese flu shots, stuff like that. That leaves us with 3 studies, that were claimed to have a inert control that were relied upon to license a routine injected childhood vaccine out of this entire list of 661. And these actually help really highlight the problem we have in terms of assessing safety with regards to the licensure of childhood vaccines. I want good clinical trial data. I need it for my practice. Okay, let me walk through those 3. One was a trial for the chickenpox vaccine, the varicella vaccine. Now that trial had, it was only a few hundred people, so it was underpowered anyway. But Dr. Scott says it's got an inert control, but actually it was an injection of neomycin, an antibiotic. That's not inert. No. And neomycin used topically can cause issues, let alone injected. The second one was Gardasil 4 trial, which had thousands and thousands of girls and women in the control group. Almost all of them got an aluminum adjuvant injection. And then there were only a few hundred, that were labeled as a inert control, but they weren't. They got everything that's in the vial except for the antigens in the alum, which included L-histidine, sorbate 80, sodium borate, yeast protein, not inert. And then the third one was a Gardasil 9 trial, which finally, by the way, did have a saline injection, just a few hundred. There were thousands and thousands of girls, women in that trial. They all got an injection of aluminum adjuvant, which I don't even know if it's ethical to inject somebody with something that's neuro and cytotoxic. But leaving that aside, the few hundred that got the placebo, but they only got it if they first got 3 doses of Gardasil 4. So again, not an actual inert control group. The result is there's 0 trials, which were relied upon in this list of 61 to license a routine injected vaccine on the CDC schedule that included a placebo, as well as 0 trials of a vaccine used as a control to license a routine injected vaccine on the CDC schedule. Ironically, by the way, this list supports the opposite of what it pretends to do. And if you want to know what was relied upon to license routine injected childhood vaccines, it's easy. Look at the clinical trial documents. That's what we do. And in fact, my submission to this committee went through every single vaccine that's a routine injected vaccine, and we cited precisely what the control was. Now, I'll just point out one quick thing here too, is that the CNN fact-checked Secretary Kennedy's claim that there is no routine injected childhood vaccine that was licensed based on a placebo-controlled trial. And it relied on Dr. Scott's list, which at the time had about 248 trials listed as being inert. Secretary Kennedy then did exactly the analysis I did, put it out on a tweet, took it apart. Not one of those was relied upon to license a routine injected childhood vaccine, nor was it used as a control to license a routine injected childhood vaccine. And then after that, apparently, somebody then scrambled all the RCT numbers for those 248. So you can't match it up with the secretary's tweet. And I guess to bury that issue, just added hundreds more, hoping that they can just hide behind this mountain of trials. But when you look at it carefully, it does not support the safety. In fact, it points out, it shows exactly the lack of safety. What's critical is this. Look, If you want to know the safety of a vaccine, and we need this stuff when parents call us and say, my child got XYZ issue after a vaccine, you need trials that are, one, properly controlled, which means either they got to get an inert substance or another vaccine that was properly licensed based on a robust trial. And then even if it has a proper control, it still needs to review safety long enough. And then even if it has a proper an error control and it reviews long enough, it then still needs to be properly powered. It needs all three to be a proper, valid clinical trial. And I can tell you, there's not a single routine injected childhood vaccine on the schedule that meets those criteria.
Well, again, the whole point of developing or doing this list, this crowdsourcing or whatever, leading an internet effort for the 661 studies was all to prove Secretary Kennedy wrong when he said that there's never been any of the vaccines on the childhood schedule that have had a true placebo-controlled, random-controlled trial. And you've just gone through the 661, and that statement's true. Dr. Scott, go ahead and, I guess try and refute that.
So, yeah, the reason why we did this project was to, yes, directly address through systematic evidence compilation the questions around the quantity and quality of clinical data supporting vaccine safety and efficacy. We found 1,000, we screened thousands. We've extracted data from 1,088 randomized controlled vaccine trials. We started our search in 1800, and studies were published from 1941 until 2025. Of those 1,088 studies that are randomized controlled trials, 661 used what we consider an inert placebo, generally saline, et cetera. There were a number of other control groups used historically for various reasons, partly for ethical considerations and partly just because things have developed over time. As far as this being an example of how there aren't enough data to support the safety and efficacy of vaccines, I don't see the logic there.
Well, I think Mr. Siri completely picked your 661 studies apart. You said, saline, et cetera. I think I was wondering what's the et cetera? Mr. Rogers, you kind of raised your hand. You want to speak to that?
Yes, ma'am, please. Thank you, Senator Johnson. So look, in PhD programs, you have to read original sources and you have to define terms. Let's be crystal clear about the definitions of these terms because the fate of the Republic depends on getting these definitions right. And Dr. Scott is playing fast and loose with these definitions. So let's be crystal clear about what we mean. Inert should mean that the substance does not cause a chemical or biological reaction in the body. When supporters of the status quo use the word inert, they can mean just about anything. Paul Offit routinely calls mercury and aluminum inert, even though they are known neurotoxicants. Philip Grandjean and Philip Langergan published, they're the best two toxicologists in the world. They published a study in 2014 that says both aluminum and ethyl mercury are known neurotoxicants. But the supporters of the status quo say that these things are safe, and they're not. They're absolutely not. In the context of vaccines, placebo should mean saline as verified by independent third-party testing. That's not what the supporters of the status quo mean when they say placebo. The fact is the FDA has no regulations concerning the contents of placebos. So manufacturers can put whatever they want into the comparator intervention and can still call it a placebo by law. Furthermore, scientific journals have no regulations concerning the contents of placebos. Sometimes the manufacturers disclose them in connection with the study, and about 2/3 of the time they do not. And a double-blind randomized control trial should have two groups. A group that receives the vaccine, that's the treatment group, and a completely unvaccinated group. Given a saline placebo, that's the control group. That's not what the supporters of the status quo mean when they say randomized control trial. They compared two groups, but one group gets the new vaccine and another group gets a shot full of aluminum adjuvants. or they compare a new shot to an older shot. But the one thing they never do is to compare a completely unvaccinated group with a vaccinated group, because everyone knows that such a trial would show harms. So if you go through all 1,704 trials in the database that Dr. Scott has put together, as Aaron Siri has done, you will find that the inert ingredients are not inert. The placebo is not saline, and the randomized controlled trial does not have a completely unvaccinated control group. And we know that my assertion here is correct because on page 9 of his written statement, Dr. Scott states that vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies are especially prone to bias. It's hard to imagine a more Orwellian statement. Up is down, left is right, dogs are cats. And according to Dr. Scott, a proper vaccinated versus unvaccinated study is unethical. That's why we're in this mess. That's why we have an autism and chronic disease epidemic in this country.
Scott, first after Scott respond to that.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if you went through all 661 trials. We haven't even conducted the full analysis yet. But once
I think Mr. Siri, Mr. Siri kind of has.
He should join our team.
He's got a pretty cracked team doing that.
Yeah,
if you let me make the decisions, I'll join your team.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's team up. First of all, we are. This is a work in progress. Hopefully it'll be published, and once it's published, I welcome any feedback for sure. In terms of how we defined controls, that has not been publicized yet because we haven't published this, okay?
Siinä meni muuten tohtori Scottilla meinaa jauhot suuhun. Aika raikkaasti. Eli siis väitetään, että on olemassa satoja tutkimuksia. Tämä Scott oli kerännyt siis 661 tutkimusta. Ja se väitti, että nämä osoittaa, että nämä lapsille, rokotusohjelman mukaiset lapsilla annetut rokotteet on turvallisia. Mutta sitten kun näitä tutkimuksia ruvettiin tutkimaan tarkemmin, niin suurin osa niistä ei koske lapsuusrokotteita edes, tai terveitä lapsia, tai käytettyjä rokotteita. Siellä oli jotain HIV-rokotteita ja ties mitä. Lisäksi nämä tutkimusten lumekontrollit, eli vertailuryhmät, eivät oikeasti ollut edes lumekontrollivertailuryhmiä, vaan näille ihmisille oli annettu jotain muuta myrkyllistä ainetta, ei pelkkää suolaliuosta. Eli siis käytännössä siis lääketeollisuus ei pystynyt antamaan ainuttakaan tutkimusta, joka oikeasti vertailisi täysin rokottamattomia lapsia täysin rokotettuihin lapsiin. Joten siis eihän me voida siis luottaa siihen, että nämä tutkimukset todistaisi rokotteiden turvallisuutta täydellisesti. Siis ei ole olemassa ainuttakaan tutkimusta, joka olisi tehty niin, että tutkittaisiin rokottamattomia ja rokotettuja. Ei ole siis olemassa semmoista tutkimusta.
The IRM report did say it is, quote, possible to make the comparison, meaning through vaccinated and unvaccinated children, through analyses of patient information contained in large databases such as the Vaccine Safety Data Link, end quote, which used to be housed at the CDC. But to date, the government has still not conducted this comparison. By the way, the CDC published a white paper in 2015 on how to do that study. Has it been done? I don't know. Has it been published? No. In 2017, one of our clients, Senator Johnson said earlier, the Informed Consent Action Network, wanted to see this exact study of comparing vaccinated versus unvaccinated children. As the trailer you just watched noted, Del Bigtree, ICANN's CEO, had met Dr. Marcus Service at one point, who was the head of infectious disease at Henry Ford Medical Center. And he agreed to meet and to potentially do the study. He conducts clinical trials for vaccines, including for the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. He's avowedly pro-vaccine. And when we met him, we argued that this was an opportunity to shut the anti-vaxxers up about their claim that unvaccinated children are healthier. To our surprise, Dr. Zerva said he would conduct the study. He recruited a chief epidemiologist and 2 statisticians within Henry Ford to do so. These were mainstream scientists who no doubt held orthodox views regarding vaccines. In early 2020, I received a copy of the study. It showed the results of the analysis comparing children enrolled in Henry Ford from 2000 to 2016 from birth onward who had no vaccines compared to those who had 1 or more vaccines. This study was based on actual medical records, meaning finally a large vaccinated versus unvaccinated study using health data from a major United States health institution, something, as the IOM pointed out, never existed before. The study began by explaining it set out to reduce vaccine hesitancy by assuring parents the CDC vaccine schedule is safe. Instead, what these researchers found was that vaccinated children had 4.29 times the rate of asthma, 3.03 times the rate of atopic disease, 5.96 times the rate of autoimmune disease, and 5.53 times the rate of neurodevelopmental disorders, which included 3.28 times the rate of developmental delay and 4.47 times the rate of speech disorder. All of these findings were statistically significant. There was also other conditions for which there were numerous cases in the vaccinated group, but 0 in the unvaccinated group. Hence, a rate cannot be calculated, including brain dysfunction, ADHD, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and tics. For example, there were 262 cases of ADHD in the vaccinated group, and there were none in the unvaccinated group. In this study, there were around 16,000 kids in the vaccinated group, by the way, and around 2,000 in the unvaccinated group. So the rate, of course, between those is important, and that's what the study compared. These findings were troubling, including because these chronic health issues can be caused by immune system dysregulation, and vaccines can cause immune system dysregulation. Citations for this are in my written submission. Overall, the study found that after 10 years, 17% of the unvaccinated children had a chronic health issue, while 57% of the vaccinated children had at least one chronic health issue, often multiple. That's 17 versus 57%. The only real problem with this study and why it didn't get submitted for publication is that its findings did not fit the belief and the policy that vaccines are safe. Had it found vaccinated children were healthier, it no doubt would have been published immediately. But because it found the opposite, it was shoved in a drawer. We have repeatedly urged Dr. Zervos and Lamoretta to submit the study for publication. They have affirmed the study was well designed and conducted, but Dr. Zervos has said he doesn't want to lose his job. And Dr. Lamoretta has said she does not want to make doctors uncomfortable. This is a real-world example of how the science around vaccines gets corrupted, how only studies that confirm the beliefs and policies that vaccines are safe get published. Everything else gets shoved in a drawer. This selection bias is dangerous and results in corrupting all the science concerning vaccine safety. We can protect children from infectious disease, and we can protect children from vaccine harms. We should and we must do both.
Eli siis sellainen tutkimus tehtiin, missä maailman huiput tutki rokotettuja ja rokottamattomia, mutta tulokset ei sitten kelvannutkaan. Joten ne sitten päätti, että no ei tätä sitten julkaista. Niiden piti nimenomaan todistaa tällä tutkimuksella, että rokotetut on terveempiä kuin rokottamattomat. Nonni, ei mennyt sitten, ei sopinut agendaan, niin pistetään tää piiloon, tää tutkimus. Yllätyitkö? Minä en. No, se tutkimus kuitenkin nykyään löytyy. Ja mä laitan tohon kuvauskenttään linkin nettisivuille, mistä tämän tutkimuksen voi käydä lukemassa. Ja tämän videon loppuun, tämän koko mun videon loppuun, tulee myös traileri tästä dokumentista, joka on tehty koskien tätä tutkimusta, jota ei julkaistu, ja myös koko rokoteohjelmaa. Tämän dokumentin nimi on Unconvenient Study, joka julkaistaan ilmeisesti 12. päivä, eli aivan pian.
Siinä mielessä kyllä huolestuttaa se, että jos tällainen politiikan tekemisen tapa tulee niin kuin yleisemmäksi eri maissa, vaikkapa Suomessa, nythän Suomessa ei ole tällaista politiikan tekemisen tapaa, että mentäisiin tämmöiseen niin kuin yksilön yksilökeskeiseen tai keskitettäisiin niin kuin valtaa yhdelle jopa henkilölle, tai että se henkilöitys sillä tavalla, että olisi tämmöistä keulakuvaa niin kuin Trump tai sitten tämä Kennedy, että meillä on edelleen tällä hetkellä vielä tämmöinen demokraattinen järjestelmä.
Anteeksi, mutta mitä tämä nainen oikein niin kuin puhuu? Että politiikan tekemisen tapa, että se on niin kuin, että on tämmöinen joku henkilö, kuten Trump tai Kennedy, kun se keskittyy tähän yhteen henkilöön, että niin kuin, tässä on nyt tämä ongelma. Kun eihän se nyt ongelma ole siinä, vaan hänellä tuntuu olevan ongelma siinä, että on tämmöisiä henkilöitä, joka kyseenalaistaa sitä, mitä tämä henkilö ei halua, että kyseenalaistetaan. Se ei halua, että kyseenalaistetaan rokotetutkimuksia, minkä perusteella kansalliset rokotetutkimukset ja ohjelmat on tehty. Tai sitten, että se ei halua edes, että niitä rokotteita ilmeisesti edes tutkitaan. Että ei saa tutkia rokotteiden vaikutusta kansanterveyteen. Miksi näiden rokotteiden tutkiminen on niin kauheata? Miksei voitaisiin nyt oikeasti vaan sitten tutkia, jos ne kerran on niin saakelin turvallisia ja hyviä, ja ne ei aiheuta mitään näitä niinku tauteja ja kansanterveydellisiä ongelmia, mitä nyt väitetään, ja minkä yhteys on nähtävissä, niin miksei niitä voida tutkia? Miksi tämä aiheuttaa näin kauheata vastareaktiota? Niin. Se on varmaan kyse sitten sitä koko saakelin alan uskottavuudesta, että kyllä mäkin olisin aika huolestunut siitä, että meillä on valehdeltu koko ajan. Koko ajan. Joku tekee tuo hilloa.
There's a tremendous amount of research out there right now that Big Pharma does not want you to look at. Their whole goal is to say science is settled. And they never really communicate from their own organizations. They use PR companies. And this is why in the media you see so many corporate puppets talking about the benefits of vaccines and the harms of RFK and how crazy he is. You have Dr. Ding. Well, he has ties to Harvard, Johns Hopkins, pharma-funded grants. Then you have Dr. Gupta. He's a former conference speaker, consultant for health tech companies. And then we have Dr. Peter Hotez. He's a Baylor professor. He's on CNN on a regular basis, profiting from the vaccine complex. Then we have Dr. Paul Offit. He's a vaccine inventor. He has vaccine patented royalty flows from something called the rotavirus shot, and he calls MAHA a distrust machine. And then we have Dr. Lena Wen, and of course we have Bill Cassidy, who has taken over $1 million in pharma PAC donations. Then we have Dr. Mike, really hyped masking for the public, partying with a bunch of people without a mask himself. And then you have Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner, extensive ties to Big Pharma, served on the board of Pfizer and other biotech companies, and acted as a paid consultant across the pharmaceutical sector. So when you see these attacks against RFK in the news, realize that the majority of them are from Big Pharma. I'm talking about over 95% of them. They're not from actual average people. They're from Big Pharma using different PR companies and different campaigns. So when they say vaccine safety is overwhelming, how can someone even say that if regulators and pharma have financial ties? Independent research is needed.
Lisää riippumatonta tutkimusta siinä peräänkuuluttaa lääkäri Erik Berg. Mitähän sieltä löytyisi, jos alkaisi kaivelemaan suomalaisten terveysammattilaisten sidoksia erilaisiin lääke- ja rokoteyhtiöihin? Kuulut lukuisia juttuja, jopa itse lääkärien suusta, kuinka maksellaan etelänmatkoja ja merkittäviä summia lahjakortteina, kun toimii lääkeyhtiön lobbareina. Ei mitään uutta auringon alla.
Mutta kyllä se huolestuttaa, miten paljon sitten Suomeenkin tulee tätä virtausta, että haluttaisiin murentaa tätä meidän järjestelmää, joka on rakentunut sitten kuitenkin tämmöisellä yhteisen solidaarisuuden ja lähimmäisen rakkauden ja semmoisen kaikista huolehtimisen eetokselle.
Joo, solidaarisuus, lähimmäisen rakkaus ja toisista välittämisen eetos. Jaaha, pakko kysyä, että mitä lähimmäisen rakkautta se on? että pistetään lapsiin 10 kertoja erilaisia aineita, minkä vaikutuksia ei olla rehellisesti ja kunnolla edes tutkittu. Sehän on nimenomaan lähimmäisen rakkautta ja toisista välittämistä, että halutaan varmistaa ja tutkia nämä rokotteet kunnolla ja perusteellisesti. Ja selvittää, onko niistä edes hyötyä vai onko niistä oikeasti jopa haittaa. Ja todellisuudessa, kuinka pahaa haittaa. Solidaarisuudesta vielä sen verran, että nämä rokotevalmistajat eivät ole vastuussa lain edessä mistään sivuvaikutuksista, vammautumisista tai jopa kuolemista. Siinä sitä solidaarisuutta sitten kerrakseen. Ja onhan se täydellinen bisnes. Kehitellä rokotteita, myydä ne suoraan kaikille maille, kaikkien maiden kansalaisille, jotka maksetaan verorahoilla. Ja jos niistä jotain ongelmia koituu, niin se ei ole niiden ongelma. Ja kansalaisten verorahoillahan ne harvat korvaukset sitten maksetaan ja jos maksellaan. Täydellinen bisnes.
Joo, huolestuttaa kyllä, että miten tässä käy. Toisaalta sitten niin ajattelen niinkin, että jos suomalaiset katsoo tätä Amerikan kehitystä ja näkee siinä tiettyjä äärimmäisiä piirteitä, niin tulee ehkä se semmoinen niin kuin vastahankaisuus, että no tohon en ainakaan lähde mukaan tuollaiseen retoriikkaan tai tuollaiseen niin kuin toimintaan, että tämä on nyt niin mennyt jo ihan lapasesta lähtenyt, että ei tämmöiseen niin kuin kannata lähteä mukaan. Että siinä mielessä mä ajattelen, että ehkä emme ole vielä siinä tilanteessa, että niin kuin meillä olisi niin kuin suurta huolta siitä, että politiikka kääntyisi tällaiseen muotoon.
No siitä ollaan kyllä samaa mieltä, että Suomi on kyllä hyvin onnistuttu indoktrinoimaan. Että voi kestää pieni hetki, että tämä jengi herää tästä ruususen unesta. Sitähän sanotaan, että ihminen on helpompi vakuuttaa valheella, kun koittaa vakuuttaa se ihminen siitä, että sille on valehdeltu. Mutta tosin, kuinka kukaan voisi tällaista edes epäillä, kun ollaan luotu tämmöinen massiivinen uskomusjärjestelmä, joka jo lapsesta asti meille kertoo, että miten asiat on. Korkeakoulutetut, valkotakkiset, yliälykkäät ja kansakuntamme viisaat kertovat meille tosiasioita. Älä sinä siinä kysele. Kyllä ne fiksummat tietää. Teet vaan mitä käsketään. Ei.
Yhdysvallat on kuitenkin ainakin ollut monella tavalla edelläkävijä maailmassa myös näissä terveyskysymyksissä ja tutkimuksissa ja kaikissa tällaisessa. Millä tavalla tämä Yhdysvaltain johdon rokotekriittisyys nyt sitten vaikuttaa koko maailmaan ja myös meille Suomeen? Onko sillä suoria vaikutuksia ja jos on, niin millä aikataululla ruvetaan puhumaan?
On hirveän vaikea mitata sitä, että minkä laajuisesti ja missä mittakaavassa tämä niin kuin vaikuttaa rokotteiden ottamiseen vaikkapa Euroopassa. Mutta se tietenkin, että tämmöiset niin kuin, keskeiset hahmot tietyllä tavalla niin kuin normalisoi sitä puhetta rokotteista, rokotekriittisyydestä, rokotevastaisuudesta. Sillähän saattaa olla totta kai vaikutuksia niin kuin rokotteiden ottamiseen.
Niin kuin normalisoi rokotekriittisyyttä, että se on jotenkin huono asia. Eikö se ole tosi hyvä asia, että ihmiset on kriittisiä kaikenlaisia asioita kohtaan, muun muassa rokotteita, mitä annetaan meidän lapsille kymmeniä syntymästä lähtien. Jotain kamaa lasten sisään, mistä me ei edes tiedetä, mitä ne aiheuttaa, koska ei ole saakeli edes tehty kunnon tutkimuksia. Eikä se ole mitään rokotevastaisuus tulee siitä, jos ei täällä olla saakeli rehellisiä. Jos täällä niinku lääkeyhtiöt peittelee tutkimustuloksia ja suorastaan valehtelee meille niiden turvallisuudesta. On tervettä järkeä kyseenalaistaa näitä asioita.
Kiitos paljon. Kyllähän tällä on vaikutuksia kaikkeen, mutta ehkä nyt kuitenkin on hyvä muistaa se, että meillä ikään kuin, vaikkakin tällä on nimenomaan ne vaikutukset, mitä Pia sanoi, että tämä niin kuin kansainvälisesti tietenkin jo pelkästään tämä puhe tietyllä tavalla ja se, että nämä hyvin näkyvät tahot kritisoi tai hyvin näkyvät tahot niin kuin, ikään kuin vähentää luottamusta siihen tieteeseen tai siihen tutkimukseen, mitä on.
Jaaha, katsotaan vähän näitä tilastoja sitten. Nämä onkin todella mielenkiintoisia, nämä tilastot. Noin, mä avaan tosta noin. Otetaan ensin tuberkuloositilastot. Nämä on siis niin kuin Yhdysvalloissa olevia tilastoja. Katsotaan täältä näin. Tuberkuloosi alkoi tuolta 1900-luvun alusta. Ja nämä on siis kuolleita 1 per 100 000. Eli ensin on ollut melkein 200 kuollutta per 100 000. Eli 20 kuollutta 10 000 ja 2 kuollutta 1000. No niin, lähdetään täältä näin. Laskee, vielä laskee. Milloin tuli rokote? Laskee, 40-luvulla laskee. Tuolla 53 tuli rokote. Nähän laski saakeli 200 per 100 000, niin 53, niin noin, olisiko tuo joku 10, 15. 15 per 100 000 oli laskenut ihan itsekseen niin kuin näin. Ja rokote tuli, niin kato, että toihan vähän loivenee jopa. Että ikään kuin, eihän se tosta jyrkkene, vaan sehän loivenee. Eihän tällä rokotteella ollut juuri mitään vaikutusta tähän kokonaisuuteen. Se koko tauti oli jo melkein poistunut ennen rokotetta. No niin, otetaan seuraava sitten. Kurkkumätä. Eli kurkkumätä on dipteria. Se on kurkkumätä. Katsotaan sama juttu. 1900-luvun alusta. 40 per 100 000 laskee, jyrkästi laskee. 21. Sitten tossa iso lasku. 25. Silloin tuli ensimmäinen kurkkumätärokote. 25. Vai oliko 26? 26 vuonna kehitettiin ensimmäinen kurkkumätärokote. Sitä ei jouduttu vielä laajasti käyttöön. No niin, laskee. Vasta 48 tai 49 tuli laajasti käyttöön. Ja katsokaa, se oli jo melkein kokonaan laskenut taas koko tauti. Tuolla on se tuo vaikutus. Mikäs seuraava? Otetaan sitten toi tuhkarokko. Measles. Tuhkarokko. Okei, tää on mielenkiintoinen. 1900-luvun alusta. Sieltä lähtee, heittelee aika paljon, näin. Heittelee. Ja sitten, koska tulee rokote? Rokote tuli vuonna 1960. Ei, kun tähän loppuu jo. 63 tuolla olisi niinku rokote. Ja sehän oli saakeli kokonaan jo kadonnut koko tauti. Tuhkarokko. Oho, ihme juttu. Katsotaan vielä lavantauti. Tää on mielenkiintoinen. Lavantauti, typhoid. Tuolta lähtee 1900-luvun alusta. Laskee ja ihan melkein olemattomaksi laskee. Ei ole mitään. Ei edes rokotetta. Ei ole rokotetta keksitty. Se on laskenut samalla lailla kuin muut, mutta vielä enemmän tuosta lopusta. Aikamoista, hei. Mitä tää tarkoittaa? No siis, tämähän tarkoittaa näköjään sitä, että eihän rokote ole se syy, mikä tässä on nyt niinku nämä taudit poistanut, vaan todellinen syy on vesi. Se on yksinkertaista, koska meidän juomaveden käsittely ja sen käsittelyn käyttöönotto ja veden käsittely on parantunut, veden lähteiden laatu on parantunut ja me ollaan, hygienia on parantunut ja sanitaatio. Kaikki nämä veteen liittyvät asiat on korjattu ja ihmisten elintaso on noussut ja ei enää olla niinku paskan keskellä, niin kaikki tauditkin on lähtenyt pois. Joo. Sitten nämä väittää, että nämä rokotteet on tämän kaiken niinku pelastanut. Mehän nähdään näistä tilastoista, että ei se ole tämä rokotteet. Tämä on ihan hölynpölyä.
I think that actually the very last sentence in Dr. Scott's testimony is, let me find it. The data are public.
Yeah, the data certainly are not public. First of all, when it comes to the clinical trials for each vaccine, we've had to sue the FDA to get the underlying clinical trial reports. For most of them, we've sued for the Varivax vaccine, for the Hep B vaccine, for many of them, and for the COVID vaccine. That's not public.
I'm going to get back to V-Safe.
V-Safe.
Dr. Rogers, isn't it true that even peer reviewers don't get to look at the data of studies? That's common.
Right.
Generally true. I mean, what is the truth in terms of how often researchers actually make the raw data available?
I mean, a proper study should make the data available. That's a norm, but that doesn't happen in the case of
part of the
vaccines.
problem with that, the Anderson et al. Study in Denmark, that's being touted that aluminum is not a problem, is people questioning cannot get the data even though it's already been de-identified. Correct?
I mean, that's true. Of
yes. And by the way, the data safety link.
Yeah, the VSD, the vaccine safety data link.
What happened to that? How available is that right now?
It's not. In 2000, up until 2000, it was part of the CDC, and you could get access to it through a FOIA. A number of people did. Published studies the CDC didn't fit the policy about vaccines, and so they then shifted it over to a trade association to get it out of the reach of the Freedom of Information Act and others. So it's been distributed. You can't get
that's not very.
VSD.
That's just it's not exactly transparency, is it?
But it's actually literally. It's not only is it not transparent, you cannot get the data underlying VSD studies. They published like the data for 2 of them, which is antithetical to how science. You can't do reproducibility. Not only that, it's selection bias, because if you want to do a study, it has to go through CDC's clearance process, actually, which means that only studies that conform with its policy that vaccines are safe are going to get published.
So let's talk about the V-Safe, which was established for the COVID injection. 10 million people voluntarily signed up. I mean, I think what they were reported is completely inadequate. But talk about how you had to sue and how long it took you to get the data from what was supposed to be the transparent safety surveillance system, and then what the results were. Could you just quick tell that story?
Over 2 years, actually collectively almost 3 years of litigation it took. V-Safe was a safety system rolled out in December 2020 along with the release of the first COVID vaccine. Up until that point, CDC touted VAERS, and they said, well, VAERS isn't reliable. We're going to have V-Safe. V-Safe, they said, was a robust, rapid way to identify safety issues with COVID-19 vaccine. 10 million Americans signed up very rapidly over about 6 months. These were the vaccine enthusiasts who got the vaccine from December 2020, and about 9 million in those first 6 months. And they got a form to fill out every day for 7 days after the shot, then every week for 6 weeks, and then 3 times after that. On that form, we checked the boxes. There were basically 2 types of check boxes. First, check the box was for symptoms. But the symptoms that the CDC chose to include were the ones that they say are normal and fine after the vaccine, and they only collect that for 7 days, what they call reactogenicity. They're good. They show the vaccine is working, you're having an immune response. So that data was completely irrelevant for assessing safety. In fact, they reported 60-70% of people reporting having that, and the CDC said, great. That leaves only one other check-the-box data that was actually worthwhile, and that was folks seeking hospital care, missing school or work, or not performing normal daily activities. Well, what the CDC was doing is they were pumping out study after study after study that only showed the first week after the shot for those 3 categories. Well, we wanted to see the full data set. My client, the Informed Consent Action Network, wanted to see the full data set. So we said to the CDC, hey, this stuff's totally de-identified. Just release it. It's literally sitting there in files. You could release it in 2 minutes. Took us almost two federal lawsuits, a year and a half of litigation, 2 years of litigation almost to get that data. And when we did, it was clear why the CDC wanted to hide it. It wanted to hide it because what it showed was 7.7% of these vaccine enthusiasts reported needing medical care that they attributed most likely to the vaccine after getting the COVID shot. 7.7, that's 1 in 13. And on average, they sought medical care 2 to 3 times each. You don't go to seek medical care 2 to 3 times each. And 75% of those were hospitalization, emergency room, or urgent care. So these were serious issues. I don't know if, and that was the only data point that VSafe could possibly have used to actually assess safety. If 1 in 13 seeking medical care on average 2 to 3 times each of the manner I just described is not enough to pull the plug, it was clear VSafe was not designed to assess safety. VSafe was designed to affirm its a priori belief this shot was safe. If it wanted to make VSafe actually a system that would assess safety, it would have added, for example, a check the box for chest pain, right? So they could assess myocarditis. It could have added a check the box for the numerous adverse events of special interest that its own VSafe protocol identified 2 months before it rolled out, including myocarditis, pericarditis, all the issues blood clotting we ended up seeing. From the clinical trial, apparently, it knew that these could potentially be issues. It put it in the design documents, but it never made it into the actual system itself. VSafe was not designed. It's the closest thing to mens rea, purposeful intent to design this system to assure that it would never actually show a safety issue. I don't think they expected that many people to report seeking medical care.
Pitää muistaa, että kyllähän niin kuin meillä on hyvin paljon osaamista muuallakin kuin Yhdysvalloissa. Ja se, että esimerkiksi semmoinen niin kuin asia, kun niin kuin luottamustieteeseen on maissa hyvin eri tasolla ja luottamusjärjestelmään, että sinänsä tämmöisiä niin kuin suoria vaikutuksia ihan pelkästään tästä asennemuutoksesta, mikä Yhdysvaltain hallinnossa on, se voi vaihdella hyvin paljonkin. Ja olen täysin samaa mieltä Pian kanssa, että Euroopassa, etenkin Pohjoismaissa, niin luottamus siihen että päättäjät perustaa päätöksensä tietoon on vahva. Mutta että se mikä vaikutus tällä tietenkin hyvin nopeasti on että silloin tällä rahoituksen pois vetämisellä esimerkiksi WHOlta ja USAIDilta, niin sillähän on vaikutuksia ihan siis käytännön tasolla rokotusohjelmien toteuttamiseen eri maissa, etenkin matalan tulotason maissa. Mutta että myös sitten ihan niin kuin EUn alueellakin, niin kyllähän se niin kuin asiantuntijuus, mitä Yhdysvallat on tarjonnut, niin se on ollut suuressa roolissa.
Aivan. Eli todella monet maat on perustanut kaikki rokoteohjelmansa Yhdysvaltain tekemiin tutkimuksiin, jotka ei siis todista yhtään mitään. No tästähän lähtee toivottavasti ihan hieno dominoefekti käyntiin. Nyt ruvetaan varmaan tutkimaan näitä oikeasti ihan kunnolla. Ja on syytäkin. Sehän on hieno asia. Jos ne on kaikki oikeasti turvallisia, niin sehän on hieno juttu. Sittenhän ei ollut mitään ongelmaa. Mutta jos se ei ole, no sitten on tietysti varmaan ongelma. Että ymmärrän kyllä tämän kauhean hädän, mikä tässä on käynnissä. Että...
Eli periaatteessa se, että niin kuin Yhdysvallat toimillaan vetää myös sitä asiantuntijuutta pois, niin sillä on vaikutuksia. Jopa ihan sillä tasolla, että moni Euroopan alueen maa muun muassa rokotusohjelman ratkaisuissaan jossain määrin nojautuu siihen tietoon, mitä tämä Yhdysvaltain nyt hyvin paljon muuttunut rokoteasiantuntijaryhmä, minkälaista niin kuin analyysiä sieltä on tullut. Että kyllä sillä on niin kuin seurannaisvaikutuksia, jotka on suoria, mutta että mä itse näkisin, että meillä väestössä luottamus rokotusohjelmaan on vahva ja sinänsä tällä kokonaisuudella, mitä Yhdysvaltain sisällä tällä hetkellä tapahtuu, niin ei välttämättä suoria vaikutuksia juuri ole.
Your next witness is Dr. Toby Rogers. Dr. Rogers is a fellow at the Brownstone Institute for Social and Economic Research. He has a PhD in political economy from the University of Sydney and a master in public policy from UC Berkeley. His research focuses on regulatory capture and corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. Mr. Roberts.
Good afternoon, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Blumenthal, and members of the Permanent Subcommittee. On July 4th, 2015, my then partner's son was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. I was in a PhD program in political economy at the University of Sydney, where I had access to almost all current scientific and medical journals. I wanted to better understand what was happening, so I went to the CDC's webpage on the causes of autism. As a PhD student, I was trained to focus on primary source documents, so I read all the references and their footnotes. To my surprise, I quickly discovered the CDC's narrative did not add up. Claims that autism is genetic don't make sense because autism prevalence was rising too fast. There's no such thing as a genetic epidemic. Then the CDC blamed valproic acid, a treatment for epilepsy that is contraindicated in pregnancy, and thalidomide, which was never approved for use in the United States. Finally, the CDC pointed to advanced parental age, but the odds ratios were modest, and the increase in the proportion of older parents is insufficient to explain the surge in autism prevalence. Furthermore, the cost of autism was already in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year in the US, and yet government was not responding with a sense of urgency. I changed my doctoral thesis topic to the political economy of autism and spent the next 4 years reading and analyzing nearly everything that's been written on autism prevalence, causation, and cost. In 2019, my thesis passed rigorous external peer review. It's now in the top 10 of the most downloaded doctoral research papers in the history of the University of Sydney. Since then, I've continued my research with Children's Health Defense, as an independent journalist, and as a fellow at Brownstone Institute. Here are the facts. In 1970, the first autism prevalence study in the US found an autism rate of less than 1 in 10,000 children. According to a study by the EPA, sometime around 1987, the autism rate in the US began to skyrocket. The most recent report from the CDC showed that 1 in 31 8-year-old children in the US in 2022 were on the autism spectrum. That's a 32,158% increase in the last 52 years. 2 massive studies from the best epidemiologists in California show that changes in diagnostic criteria only explain a small fraction of the rise in autism prevalence. There are 22 studies that claim that vaccines don't cause autism. None of these studies have a completely unvaccinated control group. So unfortunately, if you want to understand what's causing the autism epidemic, these studies are of no use. Then there are 5 large genetic research projects: AGREE, SSC, ASC, MISSING, and SPARK. Together, they produced 501 published papers. The search for the gene for autism has consumed over $2.3 billion, and researchers have almost nothing to show for it because genes don't suddenly create epidemics. The human genome just doesn't change that fast. Then there are 4 large epigenetic research projects, so genes in the environment: CHARGE, MARBLES, SEED, and EARLY. Combined, they've produced 437 publications that look at the effects of air pollution, pesticides, fluorinated substances, PCBs, nutritional factors, flame retardants, maternal metabolic conditions, and volatile organic compounds. None of these studies control for vaccines as a possible covariate or confounder, so it's impossible to know the true impact of these variables. The critical missing piece in autism research is vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. Thankfully, there are now 6 good studies that we can rely on. Unfortunately, these studies have been systematically suppressed and ignored by the mainstream media and the medical establishment. 2 studies by Gallagher and Goodman show that the birth dose of the hepatitis B vaccine significantly increases autism risk. 3 studies by Anthony Mawson confirm that vaccination increases the odds of developing autism by at least 4.2-fold. Preterm birth, coupled with vaccination, increases the odds of neurodevelopmental disability by more than 12-fold compared to preterm birth without vaccination. And finally, a study by Hooker and Miller published in 2021 found that vaccination increases autism risk 5-fold. Vaccination in the absence of breastfeeding increases autism risk 12.5-fold. Vaccination in addition to C-section birth increases autism risk 18.7-fold. After conducting this systematic review of 1,000 studies, my belief is that the autism and chronic disease epidemics are primarily caused by toxicants, mostly from vaccines and about a dozen additional toxicants. If we stop exposing children to these hazards in the first place, That would stop the epidemics of chronic illness in children. Now we must summon the political will to act. Thank you.
We are now the sickest country in the world.
It is now believed that over 54% of our kids have a permanent chronic disease. Shouldn't we look closest at the one product designed to alter our immune system for life? There'd be one easy study to rule it out, the vaccinated versus unvaccinated study.
As fate would have it, Dell met Marcus Servos.
He agreed to do a vaxxed versus unvaxxed study.
Kids that are vaccinated, it doesn't look so good.
4.47 times the amount.
5.5 times risk.
6 times increase.
Amongst the unvaccinated group, there were 0.
Like, if this is true, this is devastating.
And it needs to be published.
This is information the public should have had in 2020, and I forced the issue.
Did you see how Ford responded? They said this report was not published because it did not meet the rigorous scientific standards we demand as a premier medical research institution.
They have forced our hand. We're gonna have to show them the footage.
I'm gonna bring hidden cameras and recording equipment so that no matter what happens at this dinner, I can prove it happened.
Hey, you're doing well. Good to see you.
What do you think about the study you guys have done?
Well, I think it's a good study, but it does have limitations.
Do you find any flaws in the study? I mean, is there a way they could do the study better?
Not that I put it out just how it is. I don't want to say it's not the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do, but I just don't want to. Somebody's going to come back and they're going to say, the study is flawed.
The unpublished Henry Ford analysis is fundamentally flawed.